Self-confidence is not some mystical quality that descends upon the fortunate. It is a byproduct of confronting your own inadequacies voluntarily over and over again. It arises when you submit yourself to the discipline of growth, when you throw yourself into uncomfortable situations not because you feel ready, but because the consequences of remaining the same are far worse. Compliments, while temporarily satisfying, are a fragile substitute for the inner solidity that comes from competence earned through struggle. Competence is built on repetition and failure. You don't become confident by being told you're good. You become confident by becoming good, by seeing yourself overcome complexity and resistance in the real world. The praise of others might feel pleasant, but it becomes meaningless when tested under pressure. The only confidence that holds up under stress is the kind that is backed by the experience of mastery. When you build competence, you witness a transformation. Tasks that once seemed impossible begin to feel manageable. That psychological shift doesn't occur because someone reassured you. It happens because you witnessed your own evolution. You moved from disorder to structure, from chaos to control, and in doing so, your identity was reconfigured. You started to believe not because of words, but because of results. There is something fundamentally honest about confidence born from competence. It doesn't need to posture, it relies on ego. It doesn't inflate itself. It stands firm in the quiet certainty of ability. It is deeply grounded in the reality that you can handle what life throws at you, not because you're invincible, but because you've trained yourself to respond rather than retreat. Compliments, if anything, can become dangerous when they outpace competence. They inflate a sense of self that cannot withstand scrutiny. They create a false stability, a brittle ego built on perception rather than reality. And when the storm comes, and it always does, it is only competence that will shelter you from collapse. It is only what you've earned that holds weight when the applause dies down. Building competence also demands humility. You have to begin as a beginner, tolerate your own incompetence, and commit to doing the work anyway. That is where confidence is born, not in the moments where you shine, but in the moments where you refuse to quit despite the lack of praise. There is no shortcut. You must earn the right to believe in yourself through the rigor of lived proof. Every domain in life where you want to be confident, whether social, professional, emotional, or intellectual, has its own structure, its own hierarchy of mastery. And you are not entitled to confidence in that domain unless you've submitted yourself to the discipline of learning it. The alternative is delusion, a confidence without foundation, which eventually reveals itself under pressure. Confidence built on competence is stable because it's not reactive. It's not dependent on the opinions of others. It's not a mood or a personality trait. It's a deep familiarity with your own ability to move forward despite challenge. And that kind of self-confidence cannot be faked, borrowed, or gifted before you dare speak boldly, before you posture as a messenger of truth or reform or righteousness. You must first look inward and clean up the disorder you've allowed to fester in your own life. There is a kind of arrogance in preaching solutions when your own house is in disarray. Ordering your life isn't a prerequisite for perfection. It's a declaration of personal responsibility, a foundation that makes your words credible and your stance grounded in lived reality rather than theoretical abstraction. There is a hierarchy of truth, and at the base of that hierarchy is integrity. You cannot speak with real power if your actions betray your words. You cannot call for discipline while living in chaos. You cannot demand accountability from others while avoiding it yourself. There's nothing noble about hypocrisy disguised as passion. Boldness without alignment is noise, loud but hollow, provocative but ultimately weak. Start by examining your habits. How do you structure your time? Do you honor your commitments? Are you honest with the people closest to you? These are not minor questions. They are indicators of whether your life is ordered, whether you live by principles or by impulse. If your inner world is governed by chaos, then every time you speak with conviction, you risk leaking contradiction into the very ideas you champion. Ordering your life requires sacrifice. You cannot keep every comfort, every distraction, every rationalization. You have to choose what you value most and act accordingly day after day. That discipline creates clarity, and with clarity comes confidence. Not the shallow confidence of arrogance, but the deep, quiet confidence of someone who has done the work. Only from that place can bold speech become meaningful. The reason bold speech matters is because it's meant to disturb what is false and ignite what is true. But if you haven't wrestled with the falsehoods within yourself, then your boldness will inevitably project your unresolved issues onto others. Your speech will become reactive instead of reflective. You'll fight shadows in the world that were born in the shadows you refuse to face within. When your life is in order, your words carry weight because they emerge from struggle, not from theory. They are not mere performances of intelligence or bravado. They are hard-earned conclusions shaped by practice, by error, and by correction. And that makes all the difference. People don't follow ideas. They follow people who embody those ideas, people whose words are backed by structure, not slogans. The call to order your life is not a call to wait in silence forever. It's a call to align. Speak boldly, yes, but let your life echo your words. Let your actions confirm your claims. There's a kind of moral authority that can be faked. It's built quietly through integrity, discipline, and consistency. It's the kind of authority that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And the truth is, when your life is ordered, bold speech becomes less about you and more about what's right. It no longer needs to draw attention. It no longer hungers for validation. It simply speaks because it must, because silence would be a betrayal of everything you've built inside yourself. Assertiveness is often misunderstood. People confuse it with dominance, aggression, or control. But real assertiveness isn't about overpowering others. It's about standing firm in what you know to be right. It's rooted not in emotion or volume, but in clarity of values. Without a strong moral foundation, assertiveness becomes posturing. It becomes noise without substance, confrontation without cause. The power of moral clarity is that it sharpens your sense of what matters. It simplifies your choices. You stop trying to win arguments or manipulate outcomes. You begin to act and speak from a place of internal alignment. When you know what you stand for, and more importantly, what you will not stand for, your words begin to carry weight. You don't need to raise your voice when the ground you stand on is solid. Aggression is often a disguise for insecurity. It masks confusion. People lash out when they don't know what they believe, or when they're threatened by difference. But assertiveness doesn't fear disagreement. It invites it. Because a person with moral clarity doesn't seek to control others, they simply refuse to be controlled. They draw boundaries not out of pride, but out of principle. You don't become assertive by memorizing techniques. You become assertive by clarifying your values and organizing your life around them. You ask yourself, what do I truly believe? What kind of person do I want to be? Where is the line I will not cross, and the line I will not allow others to cross in my presence? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are essential. Without answers, your assertiveness will collapse the moment it's tested. The goal is not to win every interaction, but to remain unmoved by manipulation or intimidation. And that requires discipline. It requires restraint, because moral clarity isn't about reacting impulsively. It's about responding with intention. It's about having the spine to hold your position and the humility to revise it when better truth is presented. Assertiveness is not loud, but it is immovable. People will test your boundaries. They will push you to compromise, to stay silent, to play along. If you lack clarity, you will falter. You'll give away pieces of yourself in exchange for peace. But peace bought by self-betrayal is not peace at all. It is spiritual erosion. Assertiveness says, I will not trade my integrity for comfort. I will not become smaller to make you feel bigger. This kind of posture is not only necessary, it's contagious. It challenges others to rise. It draws out respect, not because it demands it, but because it earns it. People trust those who are clear about who they are. They might not always agree with them, but they know where they stand. And in a world full of mixed signals and masked intentions, that kind of clarity is rare. So assertiveness in its highest form is not about being loud or forceful. It's about being true. It's about knowing what you believe, speaking it clearly, and living it consistently. That's what gives your words force. That's what allows you to act with conviction and remain undisturbed when the world resists you. Confrontation, when done with intention and clarity, is not an act of hostility. It is an act of respect. It suggests that the other person is worth the truth. You do not confront those you consider incapable of growth. You don't waste energy on people you've written off. But when you care about the integrity of a relationship, or when a boundary has been crossed that matters, you step forward and you speak, not to tear down, but to call something higher into being. The avoidance of confrontation often masquerades as kindness, but it's a cowardly form of cruelty. It says, I would rather keep you comfortable than honest. It allows dysfunction to fester beneath politeness. It preserves harmony at the surface while letting rot grow underneath. There is no dignity in this. There is no strength in passivity disguised as peace. To confront is to say, I take you seriously enough to tell you what I see. I believe you're capable of hearing it. It demands presence. It requires discipline. You have to be anchored, not reactive. You can't confront effectively from a place of resentment or chaos. You have to know what you believe, why you believe it, and what outcome you're seeking. It's not about venting. It's about revealing. Genuine confrontation does not aim to destroy. It aims to realign. It says, here's the truth, and here's how it affects me. When you do this clearly, calmly, and without bitterness, you give the other person a choice to rise, to adjust, to consider. You can't control whether they will, but you've at least opened the door to honest engagement. You've cleared the fog of avoidance. And now what happens next is real. Many people fear confrontation because they associate it with loss, of approval, of comfort, of relationship. But the deeper loss is the one that comes from silence. When you betray yourself by not speaking what is true, you pay a price. And that price compounds. Over time it becomes resentment. And resentment always poisons the well from which you drink. Respect grows in the soil of honesty. People not enjoy being confronted, but they often remember it. They remember the moment someone was willing to be real with them. And even if they reject the truth in the moment, it lingers. It works on them. Sometimes. Confrontation plants a seed that blooms later. When pride has receded and clarity has returned, there is also self-respect gained in confrontation. You prove to yourself that you will speak up when it matters. You stop being a passive participant in your own life. You show yourself that your voice has weight and that you are not afraid to use it. This internal shift is more important than whether the confrontation succeeds externally. It's about reclaiming agency over your world, so confrontation is not cruelty. It's not aggression. It's not ego. It is one of the most serious forms of human engagement. When done right, it honors both truth and relationship. It draws a line not to divide, but to define. It says, I see what's happening. I know where I stand. And I'm inviting you to stand with me in what's real. Words are cheap in a world saturated with noise. Everyone talks. Everyone has an opinion, a critique, a declaration. But speech without action is hollow, and people know it. They might nod while you speak, but they watch what you do. And that's where the weight lies. In the discipline, in the decisions, in the follow-through. When you speak with no action behind your words, people stop listening. They may still hear the sound, but the substance is gone. It's like striking a drum with no skin, just empty noise. This is especially true when it comes to promises, convictions, and principles. If you say you value integrity but cut corners when it's inconvenient, the value you claim dissolves in the contradiction. Action calibrates speech. It's what gives it tension, depth, and gravity. You can only speak boldly if your life backs it up. Otherwise, you're pretending. The dissonance between word and deed doesn't just weaken your influence. It fractures your own psyche. You know you're lying even if no one calls you out. And over time, that self-deception turns corrosive. There is a quiet authority in someone who lives what they speak. They don't have to shout to be heard. Their presence speaks before they open their mouth. When they say something, people listen. Not out of obligation, but because the voice is rooted in evidence. It's not just theory. It's earned truth. This is why discipline is more powerful than charisma. Charisma may get attention in the short term, but only discipline sustains respect. People admire consistency, not theatrics. They trust someone who does what they say, not someone who constantly says what they never do. If you want your words to land, build a life that gives them credibility. Even small actions have immense weight when aligned with what you say. You don't need to make grand gestures. You just need to be congruent. If you speak about patience, show it when you're tested. If you speak about courage, act when it's inconvenient. Every time your actions align with your words, you forge a deeper layer of integrity. Not just in the eyes of others, but in yourself. The flip side is that if you consistently speak without action, you erode trust, internally and externally. Your own mind stops believing you. The promises you make to yourself lose their power. Goals become noise. Identity fractures. And then not only do others stop taking you seriously, you stop taking yourself seriously. That's the deeper cost of living out of alignment. So if you want your words to carry weight, stop focusing on how to say them more powerfully. Focus instead on how to live them more honestly. When your actions support your speech, your voice doesn't just communicate, it commands. And when that happens, you don't have to speak often. But when you do, people listen. Rejection is one of the deepest fears that govern human behavior, and yet it is precisely the barrier that must be faced if you want to become respected. Respect is not handed out freely. It's earned in moments when you risk the comfort of fitting in for the truth of who you are. When you silence yourself to avoid being rejected, you don't just lose connection with others. You sever connection with your own strength. The person who is willing to speak up, to assert boundaries, to hold a different opinion in a room that demands conformity is not reckless. They are grounded. Rejection is not the enemy. It is a signal that you are standing for something, not bending to everything. People may not agree with you, but they will remember that you weren't afraid to be authentic. And in the long run, it's authenticity, not appeasement, that earns trust. You must understand that being liked is not the same as being respected. People may like those who accommodate them, who avoid conflict, who say the right things. But they respect those who are willing to endure discomfort, uphold what they believe. If you fear rejection more than you value truth, you'll become invisible. Not because others can't see you, but because you've erased yourself from the conversation. Respect often comes from tension. It emerges when you tell someone no, and don't back down, when you challenge a lie instead of nodding politely, when you show the spine to walk away rather than betray your values. Every one of these moments carries the risk of rejection, but also the seed of lasting self-worth. You cannot be respected by others if you continually disrespect yourself to avoid conflict. There is no strength in hiding. People sense when you're afraid to speak honestly. They notice when you avoid confrontation, when you withhold your convictions to maintain peace. They may not call you out, but the unspoken verdict is clear: this person lacks courage. And without courage, there is no respect, only passive tolerance. You are merely accepted, not admired. To risk rejection is to declare that your principles matter more than your popularity. That kind of clarity attracts the right kind of people. You stop being surrounded by those who only tolerate your silence and start being followed by those who are drawn to your integrity. It refines your environment. Friends, partners, and even opportunities begin to mirror the standards you hold, and yet, every time you speak up or set a boundary, there's a cost. You may lose relationships, invitations, or short-term comfort, but the person you gain in return is yourself. You become someone you can respect. And ironically, the more you live from that place, the more others respect you as well. Not because you sought their approval, but because you stopped needing it. True respect is never given to the one who plays small to be accepted. It is given to the one who risks being misunderstood, disliked, or even cast out for the sake of something higher. And the paradox is this: the very thing you feared, rejection, becomes the door through which real respect enters. If you don't know what you stand for, you will inevitably stand in service to someone else's agenda. Values are not accessories. They are the internal compass that directs your choices, reactions, and priorities. Without them, you drift, subject to every persuasive voice, every dominant personality. Every societal current that demands your compliance. Your values are the structure that gives your life weight and form. They are the reason you say no when it would be easier to say yes, and the reason you stand firm when others retreat. Without clearly defined values, you become a mirror for the world around you, reflecting rather than originating. You won't know where you end and others begin. And that is a dangerous place to live, for most people never truly sit down and ask themselves what they believe in, what they would defend, and what they would never compromise. They inherit values from culture, family, ideology, without ever interrogating them. But until those values are consciously chosen and earned through reflection and experience, they are not really yours. They are borrowed identities, vulnerable to collapse under pressure. Knowing your values gives you an internal authority that resists manipulation. People can't guilt you into action when you've already drawn a line. They can't flatter you into betrayal when you know what betrayal looks like. But if you're unclear, if your boundaries shift depending on who's watching, you become easy to control. Those with the strongest wills will write your script for you. Every time you compromise on a value for short-term comfort, you weaken your psychological foundation. It seems small at first, just a harmless exception, a little bending to avoid conflict. But repeated often, it trains you to prioritize approval over truth. Eventually, you forget what mattered in the first place. You become adaptable to the point of being unrecognizable to yourself. Clarity around values creates clarity in decisions. You don't need to agonize over what to do when you already know what matters most. Whether it's integrity, freedom, compassion, excellence, whatever your hierarchy is, it simplifies life. Choices become expressions of identity, not reactions to pressure. And over time, that internal consistency builds trust with yourself and with others. Without doubt, neutral. You're not vulnerable. Someone is always willing to tell you who you should be, how you should live, and what you should want. And if you don't decide that for yourself, you will spend your life serving ideas, causes, and people that don't align with your own truth. That leads not just to regret, but to a quiet erosion of the self. So the real danger of not knowing your values isn't just that you'll be led astray. It's that you'll never know if the life you built was truly your own. Silence is often mistaken for virtue, especially in cultures that reward passivity over confrontation. It's easy to interpret a quiet demeanor as humility, wisdom, or grace. But if that silence is rooted in fear, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, then it isn't humility at all. It's self-protection masquerading as virtue. And over time, that protective silence becomes a prison you construct around your voice. True humility doesn't cower from truth. It doesn't shrink in the face of injustice or betray one's own conscience to maintain peace. Humility, in its most honest form, recognizes the limits of knowledge and the dignity of others. But it still speaks. It still risks. When silence is used to avoid discomfort, to dodge responsibility, or to preserve a false harmony, it's not humility. It's evasion. Fear-driven silence distorts reality. It creates space for lies to thrive and for bullies to dominate. It hands power to the loudest voice in the room rather than the truest one. When people stop speaking up out of fear, institutions rot, relationships erode, and self-respect diminishes. Silence in these moments isn't neutral. It's an act of silent assent to things that should be challenged. Many remain silent because they were taught that speaking up is arrogance, that to assert a thought, a boundary, or a truth is somehow prideful. But there is nothing humble about allowing falsehood to flourish simply because it's uncomfortable to confront. There's nothing righteous about letting harm continue because your voice might tremble when you use it. That's not grace. That's retreat. Silence motivated by fear always carries resentment beneath it. When you silence yourself to keep others comfortable, you don't become more peaceful. You become more bitter. The words you didn't say echo inside you. The boundaries you didn't set begin to blur. And slowly, you start to disappear into the background of your own life. The courage to speak, even when your voice shakes, is the real test of humility. Because it means you're not elevating your ego above truth. You're willing to risk being wrong, being misunderstood, even being disliked in service of something greater than comfort. That is not pride. That is integrity. And integrity speaks even when silence would be safer. Fear-based silence trains others how to treat you. If you never push back, never correct, never say no, the people around you will begin to assume you have nothing to say. They'll stop seeking your input. Worse, they'll walk over boundaries you never bothered to articulate. In time, you'll start resent them for